All right. Welcome back into the podcast. I am excited to do this when this opportunity presented itself. I'm not going to lie. I jumped at the opportunity to talk to one of Chicago's, famed elites, especially in the music industry. He is Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins and also the president and owner of NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. And he joins us to talk about that and a few other things. Bill Zimmerman, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you. I'm in Nashville recording a new Pumpkins album. We have a new album coming out at the moment, and there's songs on the radio from that album, which is called Autumn, which is just coming out. It's 33 songs.
Wow.
And then we're recording a new album right now, so that's why I'm in Nashville.
All right, well, let me ask you a little bit of Smashing Pumpkins here before we jump into National Wrestling Alliance. I'm a big music fan, and I'm probably about 10 years younger than you. So, the 90s is really where I really started honing in on my musical interests and tastes. So I want to ask you about that. But, I think a lot of musicians, from what I've read in interviews and whatnot, struggle for that longevity and being able to continue to write music through the years. You have those prime writing years, and then to continue as a band and creating music and that whole process, as you stay together, and that seems to be a struggle for some people. So what is it like for you as a musician, as you continue, this journey to continue to be able to put out, music that resonates with people?
Sure. Well, when you become successful when you're young, we pretty much started when I was about 24, 25, you really hit that other level of success. There's no manual, no one hands you a manual like, hey, this is how you need to behave. And you end up making, honestly, about the same mistakes that everyone seems to make. You get a lot of people around you. There's a lot of, everybody's saying stuff like, you don't need the band. And they're telling the band members they don't need me and all that stuff that you went through. So for the band to now be 35 years later, still be writing music, recording new music. We have, I think currently we have 3 singles on the charts right now. Our new song, which just came out, Spellbinding, was just #1 added at alternative. We have another song called Empires, which is a little harder, heavier song. That's #3 most added at heavy rock, active rock, which we call it. I mean, it's crazy, right? So to start from nothing to end up, sort of on top of the mountain, blow ourselves up about 15 times, put it all back together and continue. To answer the spirit of your question, I mean, really, it's about music. It's easy, just like you see in sports. It's easy to get caught up in a lot of the other stuff, the hype of it all. And at the end of the day, you got to have love for the game. And in music, it's about writing songs that people love and fall in love to and, listen to when their heart's broken and stuff like that. As long as you can do that, they'll give you a spot on the team.
Now, let me think. You said you're talking about your beginnings of the band. So I'm going to bring you way back. I just want to share a quick personal story with you. So this was, I think I was in 8th grade. I think this was April of 1992. And I was excited because I was able to score some tickets to see Guns N' Roses at the Rosemont Horizon. And so this was, a few months after Axl Rose had the St. Louis incident. So we're on our way to the Rosemont Horizon to see this concert. And we find out from basically security guards as we're entering the parking lot that the show was canceled because there was a bench warrant for Axl and he fled. And the one thing I remember is being in the car and we're seeing the opening act. And this is pre-Siamese Dream, pre-Melancholy Infinite Sadness. The opening act for that show was Smashing Pumpkins. And we loved the band name. We were talking about it on the way in. And that would have been my first opportunity to see you guys. But the show was canceled because Axl didn't want to be arrested. And it was a whole big mess. Do you remember those shows? I don't remember. I don't know if you were a touring opening act or being in Chicago, if you were just opening there. Do you remember those shows? Do you remember that incident?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I just saw and met Axl for the first time, believe it or not, at our mutual friend Lisa Marie Presley's funeral. And we were talking about those shows. We were only opening 3 of the shows, 1 in Oklahoma City and 2 in Chicago at the Allstate, back then the Rosemont Horizon. And while you were in the parking lot being told that you couldn't come in, we were on stage sound checking.
Oh, wow.
And we were sound checking away because the first show had gone kind of roughly for us. The crowd booed the entire time. Thank you very much, no. Chicago. Chicagoland. And their longtime security guy walked by and kind of did one of these, shut it down, throat slash type thing. And we were said, well, we were promised a sound check. And he said, you can keep sound checking. There's just no concert. You know what I mean? And of course, we found out the situation that was going on with the band. So yeah, so we never got to play that third show.
Right.
And unfortunately, that was the night I was going to stick around because of other issues. I hadn't seen them, and that was the night, like yourself, I was going to see them for the first time. And I didn't get a chance to that night either. And obviously, that was the heady days of GNR '92. With the entire original lineup and stuff like that. So yeah, no, I remember those shows very well, and I certainly remember being booed. You never forget that. And in fact, from the first Chicago show, I have a scar on my face. You can't see it, but I fell. I fell during the show and cut my face open with my guitar. So I bear the marks of that show for the rest of my life.
Oh man, that's some growing pains right there. Well, you guys obviously got over that. Let me ask you about being a part of that '90s rock movement, because I mean, for me and a lot of others like me, I mean that wave of rock and roll and the grunge and all that with you guys, Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, just I mean the list goes on and on. It was just I mean, to me, when I look at rock and roll, and I know there are always continuing bands coming and sounds cyclical and things will come back, but at least at this point, to me, that was the last great era of rock and roll, and you were a part of it, and you were one of the leading voices on it. How much does that matter to you as a musician, that you were able to resonate with so many people in such a great era?
Well, I'm a student of history, and I was aware at the time that what was happening, and even if you want to take us out of the equation, that what was happening was very special. It was very akin to what went on in the mid '60s. With the great, bands that came out of San Francisco and New York and Los Angeles. So I was pretty aware it was a special time, and I knew it wouldn't last because historically those things don't tend to last. So I really tried to make the most of the opportunity. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact why we're still a huge and successful band today, because of the work that we did back then. But let me tell you, I've seen something probably in the last couple of years that tells me there's another great rock and roll moment coming. And I'll give you a perfect example. We just did a festival in Mexico City called The World is a Vampire. We also had the NWA wrestling there, 30,000 people. We had a lot of great young bands on the bill, Turnstile and Death Heaven, for example. But all the young Mexican bands that we had on the bill, they were all playing hard rock, what a common fan would recognize almost like a grunge style. And I talked to some of the musicians, and they said, every band down here right now is playing this style. So I've seen indications, not just in Mexico, but in America and, of course, overseas. I've seen indications that kids are, I guess what I would say, to be simple about it, is when you feel rebellious, which many young people do about the state of the world, much like we did it in our generation, the guitar is a pretty good thing to reach for, to kind of make that point. So I feel like people are coming and cycling back to the guitar. And don't forget, even one of the biggest pop stars in the world right now, Machine Gun Kelly, who started basically as a rapper, he ended up kind of going towards rock and has had a lot of success. So I think there's something happening, and sometimes it's hard to see unless you're kind of in it. But don't be surprised, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, you might see another total explosion of young rock bands.
I would love to see it. Last musical one for you, then I want to really dive into the wrestling. I'm curious how you feel about this. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think a lot of musicians feel, differently about it, and the process and how it all goes down. I mean, you guys are 100% a Hall of Fame band to me. I know it just seems odd year after year that, certain bands just get in right away and other ones have to wait a long time. Is that something that really that matters to you, that you hope for? Or is that if or when it happens is when it happens?
Sure. Well, I think we've been eligible somewhere in the neighborhood of about 7, 8 years, something like that. So every year now, it's become a perennial question, because humbly so, people like to think of us and say, we don't understand why you're not in. I've reached a point now where, having answered this question, and I'm not offended by the question, by the way, but having answered this question, I've basically taken one of two positions, which is either I'm going to say what I really feel, or I'm just not going to talk about it. So right now I'm in the not going to talk about it camp, because honestly, there's no good answer, because I think, let me say this, everybody who gets in deserves to be in. You know what I mean? So it's a weird thing. And you see it, of course, with the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's a lot of contention. Of course, we all remember, as Chicagoans, the total disgrace of not putting Ron Santo in the Hall of Fame when he was alive. And year after year, we were told as Cubs fans, well, it's because they didn't like the way he played, and it's just unbelievable. So you can do the math there. It's a difficult situation. But look, at the end of the day, the heat around it, to use a wrestling world word, is a compliment, which is people believe that we deserve to be there someday. So I just leave it there.
Well, you 100% do, but I will jump off it. Let's jump into the NWA, because I'm excited to talk wrestling with you. NWA 312 in Chicago, in Highland Park, coming up April 7th. NWATix.com and pay-per-view available there. So I'm excited to talk about this. I'm also excited, and before we kind of dive into wrestling, kind of the serious component, that this is also going out to help the Highland Park community, and in response to the shooting and some of the things that's gone through there. And, it just continues to be just, horrible that these type of things continue to happen in this country. But specifically, you guys are doing something here to help out the community, and I think that's a great thing. So kind of talk about
sure,
how that impacted you and why you're doing this.
Well, let's start here. As we saw yesterday, there was an incident where there was a gun reported at the Highland Park High School. They had to shut down all the North Shore high schools, and obviously for the people in the local community, especially those that have students in the schools, it was very traumatizing. Because it certainly brought up a lot of bad memories. And trust me, there were 3,000 people at that parade. A lot of people in the Highland Park community and surrounding areas are certainly traumatized. So my aspect, or what should I say, my role in it, if that's, I can't think of a better word, is I want to continue to raise awareness that there are people still suffering. And we, as a community, particularly as somebody who lives in Highland Park, it's our job to continue to support those who are in need. And I've been happy and proud to do that. So when we came to decide to do the NWA in Highland Park, I haven't, since I bought the NWA 5 years ago, I've never done anything in Chicago. I thought it was fitting to bring it to Highland Park and try to bring some happiness and some joy, because at the end of the day, that's what wrestling's about, is to put some smiles on people's faces. So we're doing actually 4 events over 3 days. On Thursday the 6th, we have a meet and greet and a question and answer with Tyrus and Medusa. Both have books out. That's at my tea house, Phantom Zuzus. Then on the 7th, we have the live pay-per-view. That event is sold out, but you can watch on Fight, FITE, which is a streaming app. Very easy to order the pay-per-view. So we'll be live around the world from Highland Park, which is of course a cool thing. Then on the 8th, we're doing 2 television tapings. I think at 2 and 6. I think the 2 o'clock is pretty much sold out, and I think the 6 o'clock, if anybody wants to go, you can get your tickets at NWATix.com. Very simple to order. So we'd love to have you there. It's just a lot of fun, and people like to see the television tapings because they get a sense behind the scenes how we make our television show. And some of the proceeds from these 4 events are going to support the community fund.
Yeah, it's absolutely great that you guys are doing that. And again, yeah, like you said, NWATix.com on Fight for pay-per-view gives you a great opportunity to see these NWO events. They're fun, they're exciting. As you mentioned, Tyrus and Chris Adonis, that is the headline event. But for you got into NWA and are promoting this, you're president and all this. Obviously there's a love of wrestling there to want to get into that. So when did that love start for you? Was that a childhood thing? I mean, do you remember early WrestleMania with Hogan slamming Andre?
No, I'm older than that. I started watching wrestling around 1971 with my great grandmother.
Wow.
They lived on the northwest side. My great grandmother and my grandfather, he was divorced from my grandmother. So when I was 4 years old, I ended up living with them. And Saturday mornings, there we were watching local television in Chicago. Dick the Bruiser, the Crusher, Baron von Raschke, Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan. Of course, anybody who's a Chicago wrestling fan and anywhere near my age remembers these great legends. And so that was the first time I thought, what is this crazy thing that I'm watching? And never in a million years could I imagine I'd end up owning the very same company that I used to watch on television, the NWA being a kind of affiliated brand that encompassed a lot of the wrestling. And through the years, not only working in professional wrestling, getting to meet a lot of the legends that I grew up watching. It's been a cool adventure, but make no mistake. I mean, it is a business. And as we've seen recently with the WWE sale to the Endeavor Group, I think for somewhere in the neighborhood of $9 billion,
right.
People are questioning less and less why I've entered the professional wrestling business. This is sort of another business opportunity. I certainly love it. And I have to chuckle because oftentimes when I do interviews, the first thing they say is, he's a wrestling fan. It's like, yeah, I'm a wrestling fan, but I'm not that big a fan. I love the opportunity of bringing back the NWA as a national and international organization, being the oldest brand in the world since 1948. And if you think of, if anybody knows the history of professional wrestling, what is the WWE actually came out of the NWA? What was the AWA out of Minnesota, and the Gagnes came out of the NWA? So I own sort of the parent company of all these great brands. I mean, obviously we're not affiliated anymore, but I think that's a cool historical thing. And so trying to bring that brand back and do the hustle on the whole thing's been a really interesting journey.
Yeah, I mean, and that's thing. Those, I think a lot of the younger fans and podcasts, tend to trend to younger audiences, and so that they may not know the whole history. They know, their history may be WWE, WCW, in the 90s and things like that. But the evolution of, when you talk about like that 70s wrestling with those local circuits and really having those interesting regional brands and how it's developed into this national brand, and with so many different offshoots now and things like you said, like NWA continuing to thrive all these years later. It's one of those things that if you're old enough to see the evolution and see the continued passion and everything, and how it's evolved and changed, and how it's been a jumping off platform for so many. And I was going through everything and kind of looking through the whole NWA roster and make sure I was familiar with everything, and seeing names that I've known in the circuits for 10, 20 years. It's a heck of a product. It's fun and it's interesting, and the evolution of this industry, not over the last 20, 30 years, but over the last 50 to 60 years, is something that I don't know if a lot of younger fans, even of wrestling, quite understand where the sport was and where it is. And it's really a fascinating world to be in. And I think it's fantastic, and it's interesting that you've been able to dive into this like this and do what you're doing with the NWA.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge. When I bought the NWA, people said you're buying this thing that nobody cares about anymore. And yeah, it had its day, but that's over, and now it's all about the WWE. And since I bought the NWA, of course, we've seen the rise of AEW with the Khan family, providing a completely different take on professional wrestling, or some would say trying to bring back some of the WCW spirit that went away when the McMahons bought WCW about 20-something years ago. So, look, it's like, how can I put it? If I told you I had 3 great rock bands, would you have room for a 4th or a 5th or a 6th? And we start off talking about this great generation of alternative rock bands in the early 90s. There's always room for more great. And so what we're trying to do is bring back more great. And I think when people see what we're doing, very family-friendly entertainment, almost kind of more of a mainstream product, which is at times lacking in American television. I think people really appreciate that we're sort of historically positioned in a way that is, commensurate with the NWA history.
Yeah, and let me just before I let you go, and I appreciate so much time. This is a Chicago Bears podcast, and you got a lot of Chicago sports fans here, and I know you are a Chicago sports fan. So just a couple quick ones there before I let you go. The Chicago Cubs winning in 2016. Now, what did that mean for you as a sports fan? I know you're a huge Cubs fan. Obviously, I know that's 7 years ago, but I think there's still a lot of Cubs fans just kind of appreciating that. Now, you want to stay at the top. You're not going to sit there and rest on your laurels that the Cubs won 7 years ago. But what kind of impact did that have for you as a Cubs fan and as a Chicago sports fan, finally seeing them, for the first in your lifetime,
Sure.
getting that trophy?
Well, I was lucky enough to be at the game. I was sitting 10 rows behind home plate, so I had a perfect seat. And certainly that Game 7 might go down as one of the greatest World Series games of all time. So, for the Cubs to win and to see an all-time classic, and by the way, it was in Cleveland. It wasn't exactly a Cub-friendly atmosphere, although there were a ton of Cubs fans there.
That there were.
So it was a great moment. But looking back now, and I can't believe you said it's 7 years already. Looking back now, I think the real disappointment is they weren't able to capitalize on that team. Because when you saw that team win, you didn't feel that team was at their peak. They were just starting to hit their peak. The fact that they never really went, again, I think is a crime and a shame. I'm not here to point any blame around. There's probably plenty of blame to go around. but it is a crime, much like the Chicago, the Super Bowl Shuffle Bears, the '85
Yep.
Bears, that they never won another title. So I do like what the management is currently doing, trying to build, I guess, a 21st century style winning baseball franchise. Because as a Cubs fan, anybody who's listening as a Cubs fan knows, we get tired of like the 1 year and then the 7 bad years. So I'd like to see a perennial winner. And when you look around, particularly, as a Cubs fan, you're born to hate the St. Louis Cardinals. But just to use the St. Louis Cardinals organization by contrast, I mean, what a top-tier organization that has been year after year after year to put a winning baseball team on the field in what is essentially a small market. So I think sometimes we forget or we get lost in our trauma that we really deserve as Cubs fans a true top-tier organization on the office side to make sure that the team that they put on the field is competitive year after year. I think last I remember, and I could be wrong, the Cubs were maybe the 4th richest franchise in all of sports. I think it was like Manchester United, the New York Yankees, and I think the Cubs were 4th, up there maybe with the Dodgers. So I think as a Cubs fan, we really don't want to hear any excuses. I like the Ricketts a lot. I don't look at it as a personal thing, but certainly we deserve a top-tier organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And last one for you, Justin Fields. Look, I like Jay Cutler, and I think a lot of Bears fans like Jay Cutler, but an organization that's been around 100 years, the fact that Jay Cutler, you could argue is the greatest quarterback in the history of the franchise, a little rough on that in that position over the years. Do you think Justin Fields is the type of quarterback that can finally be that excellent, elite level quarterback for the team?
Well, if you don't mind me taking a step back on
Sure.
Jay Cutler. I was one of the only people, and I'm not a sports person, but I occasionally, I'll be on like other programs and people want to talk to me about sports. So I'm happy to talk about sports because I love it. I felt that the Chicago fan base ran Jay Cutler out of town way too early. And if just like you said, if Jay Cutler could be argued is the greatest, let's call it physical quarterback in terms of skill set that the Bears have ever had, we shouldn't have been in such a hurry to think we were going to trade up to somebody. And as you've seen with the Aaron Rodgers saga in Green Bay, what's the quarterback who was with the Jets? Is Geno Smith, who's now with Seattle.
Geno Smith
there's
in
a
Seattle,
guy they gave up on, and now he looks like a world beater. I mean, look, playing quarterback in the NFL must be one of the hardest things in the world to do. I would have no idea. But let me tell you, the other day, not too long ago, I met Boomer Esiason for the first time on his show in New York. Boomer's a big, big dude. And I met him, shook his hand. He's a massive man, right? And I said, you look like an NFL quarterback, meaning that's the prototypical quarterback. 6'6", about 240, can take the punishment. So to Mr. Fields, and as we've seen with, it was an RG3, guys like that. Yep. When you have a guy who has that level of skill set, yes, it's impressive. And yes, you marvel at that level of ability. But historically, guys like that get hurt. And as you see in the NFL, if you lose a quarterback for 1, 2, 4 games out of a season, that might be the difference that you make in the playoffs. That might be the difference of a free agent signing with your team. The NFL is a very mercenary business. There's a lot of acrimony between the players and management because of the level of money that the NFL makes. So, and I understand this from my own side in entertainment, you kind of start to get a mercenary mind. Look at, is it Odell Beckham? You see guys kind of rotate around. Why? Because they just want to get paid. So to create a winning franchise and build around a quarterback, which anybody in their right mind would be thinking in the back of their mind, is this guy going to get hurt? Could we be having a truly winning season? People are projecting us to go deep in the playoffs, and you get to game 11, and he does a simple run, goes around, and somebody creams him. And that's nothing against Mr. Fields. We're talking about it in light of his tremendous skill set. But historically, guys who run a lot get hurt. And he isn't as big as, say, a Josh Allen, who looks like he can take that level of punishment. So I hope I'm wrong is what I'm really trying to say. And I hope that his skill set endures and that the Bears are able to build around him. Obviously, there was talk that he was maybe going to go or da-da-da-da-da. They were going to bring in somebody else to draft. And now they've made their bet. They're going to stick with them. So that's so we can say the upside, but there's the downside that goes with that upside. And I think that's difficult if you're a Bears fan.
Yeah, it's definitely always a concern, any position in the NFL with injuries and how that can, your season can change on a dime.
But
But
can I
Billy,
interrupt you one more time? So let me know. But look. Why did Tom Brady play so late in his career? Because around age 30 something, Bill Belichick decided, I got to go all in on protecting this guy. This guy cannot take. Heck, the NFL changed the rules to protect Tom Brady because that's how valuable Tom Brady was to the NFL. So we don't have to look far to understand that protecting the quarterback is probably the most important duty of an NFL franchise, because that's the way they build their dynasties, right? So if you have a guy who's going to purposely put himself in harm's way because that's the way he plays football, and again, I don't mean it as criticism, right? But you have to look at it and say, you're taking a bet there that may not work out in the long term. You might get 3 years of momentum and you start to think, okay, this is really going to work. And on that fourth year, the guy gets hurt on a very simple play because instead of just throwing the ball away, he decides to go for a 12-yard run. And you spend the rest of your life going, gee, I wish he didn't do that one thing.
Yeah, no, and look, I pound the table all the time for the Bears to get offensive line and invest. Again, Jay Cutler, we were talking about him. He needed an offensive line, and the Bears never gave it to him. It's critical for quarterbacks. So I am with you 100%. Need to protect the quarterback. Well, Billy, I could talk to you another half hour, but that's not fair to you. So I know you're off to the studio, and you've got work to do here with the new album and everything you guys got going on. But again, NWA 312. You got Saturday. You have TV tapings, so NWATix.com, and of course the pay-per-view Friday night, April 7th. Billy, I really enjoyed this. Thanks for so much time. Really appreciate it, and good luck in the future with everything.
Awesome. Thanks, my friend. Talk to you again.